Hey everyone, so in the previous video we looked at how Eula works as a character, and we also tried to build her as a split damage DPS in a melt team with Diluc and Jongrin and lots of both Greystone. In today's video we're going to be looking at another new character from the 3.5 update. We are going to be looking at Kokomi this time. We're going to be looking at how she works, how her specialization works, how her talents work, and also how she functions in a freeze team with both Eula and Mona. So yeah, let's get into the video and let's look at Kokomi as a character. So if you know how Kokomi works as an in-game character in Genshin, in the actual Genshin game, not the TCG, you will know that she's pretty much an aggressive healer, and that's actually kind of how she works in the card game as well. Basically, she deals damage to your opponent while healing your team at the same time. And if you look at the kit of her as a card character, she is quite reminiscent of both how Mona and Barbara function. She's basically a combination of both of them. So with the normal attack, you just deal 1 hydro damage, nothing special about that. But what is interesting about her is actually her elemental skill and her elemental burst. With the elemental skill, you called Kurage's Oath. Basically, you gain hydro application and you summon 1 Bake Kurage. And what is the Bake Kurage? Bake Kurage is basically her little jellyfish friend that says during the end phase, you will deal 1 hydro damage to your opponent while also healing your active character for 1 HP. So this is kind of like similar to Mona's elemental skill, right? Because with Mona's elemental skill, you'll be able to summon that little dog thing that deals 1 hydro damage at the end of your turn. And I really like that effect because essentially it says that, hey, your opponent is going to get hydro application and it's going to set up your turn for a whole lot of reactions, right? You can set up your turns for freeze, set up your turn for vaporize, set up your turn for electric charge, set up your turn for hyper bloom. So I think having these sort of end phase attacks is pretty powerful. And on top of that, it also heals your active character for 1 HP, which is really good, right? Because it's kind of basically having a mushroom pizza on field and ensuring that while your active character is healed up, your active character also gets supported from an aggressive perspective because your opponent is going to get hydro application. So I like this elemental skill. My only reservation about it is that Kokomi does gain hydro application, and this is kind of a problem to me because I don't like telegraphing to my opponents what kind of elemental reaction they're about to deal to me. If Kokomi gains hydro application, if you use the skill too early, essentially your opponent can go into their Jongrin, their Kaeya, whatever pyro characters they have. They will be able to freeze Kokomi, and it means that I must swap out and it basically wastes a turn of mine and wastes any sort of tempo momentum that I have. So having hydro application can be quite troublesome sometimes. So my recommendation, if you're playing Kokomi, is that you should kind of play her like how most people play Yoimiya, right? Whereby if you're going last and if you know your opponent has already ended their turn, go into Kokomi and summon this Bake Kurage to get a hydro application, and then set up some healing, and even if you gain hydro application, then it is fine, right? Because your opponent is only going to freeze Kokomi at the start of your next turn. And if you have Kokomi on the field, if your opponent has hydro application, it's unlikely that you want Kokomi to be your attacker anyway. So what I'll recommend is that have Kokomi as your final character of the turn to set up this Bake Kurage. If she gets frozen at the start of the next turn, it's fine, just going to Eula to do some big freeze damage. So that is my perspective of how we can get over this potential vulnerability, potential weakness. And I guess the other thing about this, right, is that having hydro application is not a bad thing all the time, because if your Kokomi is already has some sort of elemental reaction applied to her, for example, if she already has pyro applied, if she already has electro applied, if she already has some other thing applied, if she uses hydro application, she basically clears herself of elemental reaction or elemental application, and therefore she clears herself from any sort of buff attack from your opponent. So it can be a good thing. The only thing to look out for is that if Kokomi has Cryo applied to her, and if she uses Hydro Application on herself, she's just gonna get herself frozen. So with that in mind, I would still argue that it is good to use Kurage's Oath at the end of your turn, especially if you have Cryo applied to Kokomi, because it means that Kokomi will be frozen immediately, but it's the end of the turn anyway, so the frozen status would be able to be reset by the time you get onto your next round. So Kurage's Oath, it is good, I like it. It helps to set up big elemental reaction turns for you, helps to heal your team, but just be careful about when you use it. Next up we have her Elemental Burst, which is called Nereid's Ascension. Essentially it does 3 Hydro damage, and your character gains a Ceremonial Garment as well. So before looking at Ceremonial Garment, I actually quite like this Elemental Burst because it only costs 3 Hydro dice and only costs 2 Elemental Energy in order to bring it up online. So what this means is that you can expect to use this Elemental Burst pretty often. The only downside of it is that Kokomi does not deal that much damage. If your opponent is very shield heavy, is very recovery heavy, Kokomi, you shouldn't expect Kokomi to be killing them off, right? Because even with a burst, you only deals 3 damage. But what is important about this burst is that it's not actually a damage dealing burst. It's more of like trying to set up the longevity of your team, because after you use the Elemental Burst, right, you gain the Ceremonial Garment. Ceremonial Garment is an effect that stays on for 2 rounds. What it does is 2 things. Essentially, Kokomi will be able to deal 1 extra damage in her normal attack, so she's dealing 2 Hydro damage instead of 1. The second thing that is more important is that every time Kokomi uses a normal attack, she will heal 1 for all of your characters. So it's basically kind of like an inbuilt Hydro Resonance card thing, right? Whereby you heal your entire team. And I think this is pretty powerful because imagine in the early game, in this particular team that I have Mona, Eula, and Kokomi. I use Mona and I use Eula to deal a ton of chip damage, and then they're about to die. You can swap in over to Kokomi, set up her Elemental Burst, use her Elemental Burst, and then start healing up the rest of my team. So I quite like this effect, but again, this is an effect that does not win games for you. It basically increases the longevity of your team, but it does not win games because it does not knock out your opponents. It's still pretty weak as a damage dealing burst. So do not be greedy with it. Only use it if you are sure that keeping the rest of your team alive will help you to defeat your opponent. So yep, that's my final caution. Do not be overly reliant on Kokomi. She heals well, she deals some damage, but do not think of her as a must play every turn. Do not think of her as a character whereby you must activate all of the skills every single turn. Next up, let's look at Kokomi's specialization card. It is called Summoner's Cascade, and it is basically an Elemental Burst talent card. So when you use this card, it essentially does 2 things. The first thing it does is that if you have a Bakekurage on the field, if you have your Jellyfish friend on the field, the usage will be refreshed, right? And the second thing is that as you use your burst through this talent card, naturally you have Ceremonial Garment online, right? And once Ceremonial Garment is active, the Bakekurage also deals 1 additional damage. So what this means is that Bakekurage is refreshed. It will probably get 1 more usage out of it. And the second thing is that it will now deal 2 Hydro characters, due to a Hydro damage to your opponent's characters instead of 1 damage. So from my perspective, I wouldn't use this card in my deck because I think it is pretty weak for me to justify it in my card slot. All it does is dealing 2 more damage, assuming I have to assume that I have Bakekurage on the field in the first place, right? Which is something that may not be happening consistently. And the second thing is that it would deal just 1 extra damage per turn, which means that if you have Bakekurage on the field for 2 turns, it will just deal 2 extra Hydro damage. So I feel like for something that requires an additional card slot, I would much prefer to play all of my other cards instead of this particular talent card. So if I were you, I would probably not use it. I think it is I don't like to say that cards are bad cards, but it's a very niche card that needs a very certain specific set of conditions for it to maximize its value. So it is too niche for me, it is not for me. But if you think there is a better way of using this consistently and if it's powerful, let me know in the comment section below. Next up, let's look at the actual freeze team that we have built for Kokomi. It is essentially a Kokomi, Eula and Mona freeze team with some sort of shatter mechanic as well. So I've been inspired by a Reddit user that I was speaking to about my Eula deck. Their name is Ninja Saki, and they were telling me about how they used Eula in a shatter deck with Eula, Kaeya and Mona. I thought that was super interesting, and I didn't consider, using the shatter mechanic to get some extra physical damage out of Eula. So I thought I would have a go at it as well, and also have Kokomi in there in order to increase the longevity of Eula and Mona in the game. So with this team, what are you trying to do? As I mentioned earlier in Kokomi's analysis, right? I would probably not start her as my active character, because to get the most value out of Kokomi, you actually want to get her Bakekurage on, because if you can get her Bakekurage on, it means that you can deal a lot of end phase hydro damage, which sets up for a Eula freeze attack and a Eula shatter attack. And therefore, my best bet or my preference for this particular team is to use Mona as a starter to scout what your opponent is doing, because with Mona, you'll be able to fast action and change into another character, right? So the purpose of this team is really to send Mona in, use her elemental skill to set up for some end phase hydro damage and also to deal some hydro damage to your opponent. Try to set up some sort of equipment support for Eula so that she is as tanky as possible. I really love this General's Ancient Helmet. It's basically the Monolith artifact, right? I really like this because it helps Eula or the rest of my team get 2 health per turn. I will get into that later. But the purpose of this team really is to set up Mona, get some hydro damage going, go into Eula, freeze and shatter people, and then when your team is low on health, or when your team or if your opponent ends their turn first, I will swap into Kokomi and then activate the Bakekurage so that I can continue to deal damage while also heal the team at the same time. So that is basically the purpose of this particular deck. Just to summarize, go into Mona, set up Hydro, go into Eula, freeze and shatter, go into Kokomi, heal and use a burst and do more heals, and try to win the game by outlasting your opponent's decks. So that is basically the team synergy that we have here. So next up, let's talk about the different characters that we have in this particular team. First, let's talk about Mona. I've already reviewed Mona before in one of my earlier videos, but I really like Mona. I rate her because of her passive ability. It essentially says when you perform a switch character action for Mona as your active character, it is considered a fast action rather than a combat action. So this means that Mona is able to swap into your Eula or Kokomi as basically a fast action, and it's kind of like a free leave it to me, right? So that is super powerful because you can essentially use Mona to start to set up hydro damage, tank attacks, and then after that swap over to Eula so that you will be able to freeze your opponents. So I really like Mona for that particular passive skill, and also I really like her because of her elemental burst. Do take note that her elemental burst is something to not ignore. It uses 4 hydro damage, right? And it also creates 1 illusory bubble. The important thing about this bubble is that your next attack by any other character is going to be double the damage. And if you look at what Eula does, essentially if she has, in her elemental skill, if she has Grimheart online, Grimheart allows her elemental skill to do 2+2 damage, which means that her elemental skill is going to cause 8 damage through the use of Mona's elemental burst. So this is super powerful. I really rate it. So use Mona in conjunction with Eula. Next up, I'm going to talk about Eula. But the thing is, we have already reviewed Eula in our previous deck guide video. If you want to find out more about how to best maximize Eula's damage, Do have a look at that, but short answer is Eula is good, not because she is an upfront DPS like Diluc or Chong'un. She is good because she is very sneaky. With her elemental skill, she can either do 2 or 4 damage, and you have to keep your opponents guessing, right, as to when you are going to be really unleashing your extra Grimheart damage. And with your elemental burst, because I'm not playing the specialization skill for Eula in this deck, it means that the maximum damage they can go up to for her elemental burst is about 12 damage. It's going to split 6-6 damage for your opponents. So even having 6-6 damage is still pretty important, because in the mid game or late game, it might help to knock out 2 of your opponent's characters at the same time. So if you want to find out more about Eula, watch the previous video. I'll put a link in the description down below. But essentially, Eula is good because she can sneak attacks at your opponent. Elemental skill can do 4 damage. Elemental burst can do 6+6 damage. That is the long and short of it, so yeah. Next, let's talk about what the ideal opening hand looks like for this particular team. So if it hasn't been clear enough so far, this team is, or rather this deck is a deck that is very stallish in nature. And the reason why it is stallish in nature is because you have a good healer in Kokomi, you have a good bunch of healing locations like Wangshu Inn and Favonis Cathedral, but most importantly, the MVP for this particular deck is the General Ancient Helm, because it says that if you equip this artifact to one of your characters, when your turn begins, this provides 2 shield points to that character. So the aim of the game during your first turn is to look for General's Ancient Helm and then start to attach it to one of your characters so that they essentially gain 2 HP every single turn. The 2 HP can really hurt if you're playing a long game like I am in this particular deck. So in an ideal opening hand, look for General's Ancient Helm. You have to have at least one of this from my perspective. Apart from that, it is also good to get a few other cards. Another card that I really like to have is Liu Su, because with Liu Su, I'll be able to set up Kokomi or Eula's burst very quickly, since they only need 2 energy in order to use their burst. So I would have Ancient Helm, I would have Liu Su. Having a dice is always good, having Paimon or Lidburn, they're always good. Having Leave It To Me is especially good because of how you want this team to function. Because with this team, you can fast action from Mona into Eula, but what if you need to heal your team, right? What if you need to go into Kokomi, and then you can't afford to go back into Eula too quickly, because the situation here can be that you use Kokomi, you have the Bake Kurage on the field, and then Bake Kurage at the end turn deals 1 hydro damage to your opponent. That is the perfect opportunity for you to go into Eula and freeze it. But if you can't switch from Kokomi into Eula as a fast action, it means that the moment you swap into Eula, your opponent might have already swapped into another character, and therefore you can't get that additional freeze damage or shatter damage. So I like Leave It To Me because it makes Kokomi a lot more playable in this particular deck in the way that I want to play it. So just to summarize, what are the cards that you really want? Ancient Helm, definitely. Liu Su, you want Leave It To Me, and then other quick cards to have would be Liban or Paimon, or just the Hydro Dice in general. So those are the 6 cards that I would aim to have in my opening hand. So what does your ideal first turn look like? So as I mentioned earlier, the card that you really want in your opening hand is the Monolith, and what you want to do is essentially, as I would show in this gameplay video, or you'll probably see this whole game later on as well in the gameplay section. But essentially, I want to start with Mona. I use her elemental skill to start to deal some hydro damage, right? And then with that, it guarantees me 2 things. It means that my opponent's active character is going to get hydro damage, and it also means that if they swap out to another character, the other character is going to get hydro as well. So it means that 2 out of 3 characters have hydro applied, and it's going to be easier to freeze their team and trip them up. So that's the first thing I do. I spend my first 3 dice on this. The second thing that I do is that now that I know that they've gone into Kokomi, right? It means that the moment we end our turn, this is going to deal hydro to them, right? Or if they're going to summon their own Bakukarage, it also means that they're going to get Hydro on themselves as well. So it guarantees that I'm going to get 2 different Hydro applied to my opponent characters. So what I want to do here is that I actually want to go over into Eula instead as a fast action. The reason why I want to do that is because it means that I can start to deal damage to Kokomi, or I can spend some of my dice to start to equip the Ancient Helm so that my Eula can get 2 HP for the rest of the game, which is super powerful. It's really a power move to do at the start of the game. So I swapped over into Eula. I'm going to deal normal attack here. The reason why I do normal damage here is because if I deal physical damage here, I do not get Pyro applied to Kokomi, right? And since I do not get Pyro applied to Kokomi, it means that at the end phase, this guy deals Hydro to her. She does not freeze. She would still have Hydro application on her, so that I'll be able to freeze her using Eula at the start of the next turn. And then before I ended my round, I basically played out the Hydro dice, which is also one of the cards that I really like to have at the start of my turn or start of my game, so that I can have 2 elemental dice. I have the Ancient Helm set up, and this sets me up for a really strong position for the rest of the game. Sure, my opponent can attack me, etc, etc, but Eula is just going to heal up. This is going to deal Hydro damage. Eula is going to freeze this. They have to swap into something else. If they swap into Fischl, I get to freeze Fischl as well, and therefore they don't get the Superconduct going. So this is what I really like to do in my opening turn with this team. So that might be a bit of a weird experience for some of you here, because essentially what I was saying is that in my turn 1, I just completely ignore Kokomi because I'm setting up with the use of Mona and Eula. And that is correct, because if you remember what I said in my analysis of Kokomi, right? I don't like to use her as a starting character. It's nice to have the heal at the start, but at what cost, right? Essentially, if you play her too early and then you summon the Bakukarage, you allow her to get Hydro application, and if your opponent is playing like a Diluc or a Bennett or a Klee, it means that she's going to take a total of 3 plus 2 damage, a total of 5 damage. She goes up to 5 health just for you to recover 1 damage from Kokomi and deal 1 Hydro damage to your character. I feel like that is a very bad trade, and therefore I don't like to use Kokomi in my starting turn. I like to use her as a character towards, you know, maybe the mid game whereby I need a bit of buff, a bit of longevity to Eula and Mona. So that is how I use Kokomi. It might seem like it's not a Kokomi deck because I don't use her all the time, but I feel like it is a character that, you know, she is a character that you cannot be using all the time anyway. Now let's look at the different card options, the card choices that we've made in this particular deck. It may be quite interesting because there are some cards that I don't really play too often if you look at the rest of my deck guides. So let's look at the first section of the deck, which is the equipment section of the deck. So with the equipment, I actually play 2 types of equipment here. I play the General Ancient Helm, as I've already told you about. I love this artifact. It's super powerful for a stall deck. The other card that I have here is actually the White Iron Greatsword. So some people, or rather you might know that, you know, if you look at my previous deck guides, I'm a huge fan of Claymore play. I'm a huge fan of Wolf's Greystone, and you might, you know, I wouldn't fault you if you thought I was going to add Wolf's Greystone as an auto include here since Eula is in here. But instead of playing Wolf's Greystone, I actually like having White Iron Greatsword in here. Reason for that is because it costs 1 less, and it allows your character to do 1 extra damage as well. That one extra damage is actually super helpful for Eula, because her physical damage and her elemental skill damage, it might seem a little bit underrated. For example, with her normal attack, she deals 2 physical damage, right, which is normal, but dealing 3 physical damage can actually be, you know, a game changer when it comes to the fine margin of things that we're trying to close out the game. The second thing is about why it's so important to get the extra damage is also because for your elemental skill, right, if you have the Great Sword attached, it is going to deal 3 damage in the first attack, and then the second attack is going to deal a total of 5 damage, which brings you to a total of 8 damage through the use of 6 elemental dice. So I really like having the White Iron Greatsword. It does bring a lot of value over time, and because it's a bit cheaper to play, it means that it's easy for you to play this while you have, you know, a lot of Paimon extra dice set up. If you have a lot of independent extra dice, you can play this, go into your burst, and then you can go out with it and have extra stacks with a lot of damage through the use of your white iron greatsword as well. So I like having these two equipment in this particular deck. Next up, we have our dice farming package. It's the usual. It's your girl Paimon and your boy Liban. Nothing much to say about them because we all know about them, and we also have the hydro dice as well, because why wouldn't you play this if you have some sort of resonance and the resonance within your team, right? So that is the very basic dice farming package. But what is more interesting than the dice farming package is actually the survivability package of this particular deck. As I mentioned earlier, this is a stall deck, it's a shield deck, it's a recovery deck, it's a freeze deck. It aims to annoy the hell out of your opponent, waste their resources, and waste, you know, their things such as their Paimon, waste their turn, waste their Liban, right? So the kind of recovery that I run here is that I have 2 of Wangshu in. 2 of Wangshu in is good because Mona might be taking a lot of upfront damage in the starting turns, in the beginning rounds, if you're trying to use Mona to set up for Eula, right? So Wangshu in is good because it helps you to heal Mona and back while she rests, while Eula is out there tanking damage through the use of the helm, and tanking damage and dealing damage in general. The other one that I have here is for Bonus Cathedral. I really like this for Eula because when you have this for Eula, essentially it means that she can take 2 damage with the helm, and then she even heals for 2 damage as well, which means that she has a total of plus 4 HP at the start of each round, and that is pretty disgusting. And finally, with the final healing card that I have here, that is not a food, is Elemental Resonance, Soothing Water. It is one of the most annoying cards that anyone can play if they have a Hydro team, because it heals your active character for 2 HP and heals the rest of your team for 1 HP. And it might really throw your opponent's calculations off, because let's say they have a burst attack, they think they're gonna win the game, you play this, and suddenly, you know, if they have a Fischl burst, the extra 1 HP might mean that the rest of your team doesn't die because they've got extra 1 HP, right? So it is a super annoying card and it costs only 1 die. So I really like this card. And I lied because I said that was the final recovery item, but we actually also have all reliable 1-star hash brown, 1 for 2 HP, can never go wrong. Next up, we have the energy farming package as well. We have Lusu, essentially cost 1. When you switch Lusu, if your character has no energy, your active character now gains 1 energy. I haven't lost yet, which means that, you know, when your character is dead, you can play this for free, gain 1 Omni Element and gain 1 energy. And then you also have Kelsa's Art to shift 1 energy from your characters on standby to your active character. So some of you may ask me, you know, hey, Eula and Kokomi, they only use 2 energy to use their burst. Why are you playing so aggressively and trying to set them up with the use of Kelsa's Art? So I like Kelsa's Art because if Eula has 1 energy, if Mona has 1 energy, you swap over to Kokomi, use Kelsa's Art, you can use your Elemental Burst immediately, which means that you can start healing as soon as possible. It means that you do not expose your Kokomi to a big damage because you decide to use your Kurage's Oath, right? Because Kurage's Oath, admittedly, it is good, as I mentioned earlier, it is good at dealing end of phase Hydro attack, it is good at healing your active character for 1, but if you want consistent healing while also dealing damage, I much prefer having Elemental Burst online, and therefore I would like to play Kelsa's Art just to absorb Eula and Mona's energy into Kokomi so that I can start to deal 3 damage and start to deal buff normal attacks and also heal the rest of my team. So that's the reason behind Kelsa's Art. Finally, we have the rest of the cards that we play here. We have Leave It To Me. I've already explained why this is so important in this deck. It makes Kokomi a lot more playable, and it ensures that, you know, she does not break your flow of setting up Eula as a freeze shatter character. The other card that I have here is Adeptus Temptation. I really like this because for the cost of 2, your character's next Elemental Burst is going to do plus 3 damage. And since you have Paimon, since you have Liban on the team, paying 2 for 3 damage is actually pretty good because it means that a lot of your characters' Elemental Burst hurt a lot more. Mona is going to deal 7 Hydro damage, which is massive. Eula is going to deal 5 Pyro damage, which doesn't sound like much, but she still has a Light Force Sword online, right? And then Kokomi is going to deal 6 hydro damage rather than 3. So I really like having the adaptation because it might throw your opponent's calculations off as well, because they might think, haha, Mona, Kokomi, Eula, they're not going to do that much damage on your elemental first turn. Therefore, I'm going to send out a character to tank that damage, and then bam, you play adaptation and suddenly you knock out their active character and their whole strategy crumbles, right? So I really like having adaptation. Do play it, give it a go. And yeah, so that's basically all of the different cards that I have in this particular deck. So in summary, what does this deck do? I know this, I'm saying that this is a Kokomi deck, but it is not a Kokomi main deck. Kokomi is a very, very important pivot piece of this particular team, of this puzzle. She is there to ensure that the rest of the team survives, but the mainstay here is still using Mona to consistently apply Hydro to your team or your opponent's team, and using Eula to freeze and shatter, and using the Ancient Helm to make Eula a massive tank, and using lots of recovery to ensure that your team doesn't die. So that is basically the whole idea of this particular deck. And some people might say, I know in my previous video I already showed all of you that, hey, Eula's burst dies to send off, right? Which feels really bad because maybe you thought using a burst you'll be able to kill 2 characters off. But in my gameplay videos that are coming up next, I'm going to show you that even if Eula's burst is going to get deleted by send off, because of how tanky this team is, because of how much longevity this team is still going to survive, this team is still going to win. And I'm gonna show it to you in just a little bit when we go over to the gameplay video. But if you watched it so far, if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. And yeah, let's go into the gameplay. So in this first match, we are up against a Mirror Maiden, Kokomi, and Fischl team. So this is interesting because they're basically probably trying to do all sorts of control shenanigans with the use of Mirror Maiden and try to snipe off my team through the use of Fischl as well. And apologies, I don't actually have audio from my characters from this particular game because I forgot to unmute my laptop when recording. But anyway, I am going first. I decided to send in Mona first, and you probably saw my mulligan. I was very lucky because after I mulligan, I managed to get the Ancient Helm into my hand. So this is basically the start of the game, the starting sequence of the game that I've already looked at when I was trying to walk you through what the ideal first turn looks like. So I'm not going to be repeating some of the things I've already said earlier, but essentially start of the turn I go into Mona, I use her elemental skill so that I can apply Hydro to Fischl. Now that I see them go into Kokomi, I'm quite happy as well. I'm just going to wait for my Mona summon to deal Hydro damage at the end of the turn, so I can swap over to Eula and start to do some chip damage, some chip physical damage, so that I do not apply Cryo. As I also mentioned earlier, applying Cryo is super important, or rather not applying Cryo here is super important, because if I apply Cryo now, the Mona summon is going to freeze Kokomi at the end of the turn, but I don't want them to freeze during the end of their turn. I want them to freeze during their turn so that they can waste a dice, waste a turn in order to swap to another character. So what I decided to do here is that I opted to go for the physical attack instead, dealing 2 damage. It's not much, but it is honest work. Dealing 2 damage, and then finally at the end of my turn, because I'm very lucky to have the Hydro dice, I'm able to go for the Hydro dice and play the Ancient Helm so that my tanky Eula is now up and running. So now with the Hydro, or rather with the Ancient Helm, Eula is super strong as a starter character because she'll be able to take 2 more damage from any of my opponent's characters. And if I am having this extra 2 HP at the start of my game, if this game goes on for 5 rounds, it also means that Eula has a total of extra 10 health, which is a huge menace. So yeah, don't sleep on this artifact is fantastic. So here you can see my opponent going back into the Fischl. I don't really understand this play of, using the Bake Kurage for Kokomi and then going back into Fischl, because essentially they're still giving me what I want, right? What I want is as much Hydro application on my opponent as possible, and they were applying it to themselves. So I can see why they're going into Fischl, because they probably wanted to start to get the Oz Superconduct damage going, but by switching into Fischl, it also means that my Eula was able to freeze them, which gives me some sort of like a free damage against Fischl. So I wasn't too unhappy with that particular move there. They go into Mirror Maiden, and Mirror Maiden is something that I really need to be very careful of. I need to be sure that I heal up, because if they have some extra dice, essentially Mirror Maiden can attack twice and also deal me some sort of big elemental burst damage, right? Because the elemental burst is going to cost just 2 energy and it does 5 damage. So it means that if I'm not careful, they could actually deal a total of 11 damage against my Eula in this turn, which is why I decided to, play it conservatively. I want to, not bet on my chances of getting knocked out, but if I am gonna get low, I just wanted to set up my Paimon and get my Football's Cathedral so that my Eula can, chill for a turn, use the extra Paimon dice next turn to get her burst going, and also start to heal up. So by using the Cathedral, Eula is going to heal by 2 HP, and then the Ancient Heart is going to give her another 2 HP again, giving her a total of 4 HP increase. So very happy with that setup, but I am still looking quite dangerously low at 6 HP. And luckily I did manage to draw into the Mondstadt Hash Brown. So even if my opponent uses the Elemental Burst here, I don't feel super threatened yet, because I am able to soak up 2 damage, take 3 damage, go down to 3, and then I'll be able to go for the Mondstadt Hash Brown to go for a total of 5 HP for Eula again. And actually, having the Elemental Burst for Eula out here is a double-edged sword, right? Because my opponent can use Send Off to delete it, but if they were to use it, it means that they're going to spend more resources to delete it, and it means that they are going to, waste a lot of extra dice just to prevent me from dealing damage. So I don't really mind that. So what I decided to do is to try to maximize my stacks, increase the number of attacks I can do against Fischl. I did do physical damage against it. It was eaten up at the Lotus, but it's fine because my Lightfall Sword was able to get more stacks and hopefully knock out Fischl here. They swap over to Kokomi, but that is fine. I think they're probably trying to deal some Hydro application on me. But luckily I just played the Mondstadt Hash Brown. I had 1 left dice, so I could play the Hash Brown and then heal up my Eula, and my Eula will be able to heal up to 10 HP through the use of the Fulfillment's Cathedral as well. So unfortunately they do use the Send Off to delete my stacks, but that is fine because Eula is now back at full health again, and then she's gonna get another 2 more HP from the Ancient Millilith artifact again. So playing in this particular deck is quite rewarding if you are a patient player, because I don't mind that they use the Send Off to kind of delete my Eula, because in order to do what they have to do, they have to swap into Kokomi, and now I'm able to freeze them all over again. So I am still able to keep that pressure up, and they must swap into another character. So at this point, it really feels like the aim of the game is to, get Eula's burst up as many times as possible. If they want to use Send Off, they can only use Send Off twice, right? Because we can only have 2 copies of the same card. So now that I have Eula on again, I don't really feel super threatened. I could either, use Liban, set up for next turn. I can even use Footballers Cathedral, set up for next turn, or I can even, use the burst now, do some cheeky damage against the Mirror Maiden. But I do decide to play a bit more conservatively, because what I recognize is that yes, I can attack more with Eula. I can use the burst, I can use some damage, I can even use Foreboding's Cathedral to keep healing Eula up. But the problem here is that I've run out of any sort of Hydro application against my entire opponent's board. None of them have Hydro application at the fly. So if I go into Mona now, it means that if they don't swap out of the Mirror Maiden, it means that I'll be able to freeze the Mirror Maiden. If they do swap out, it means that I'll be able to apply Hydro application to either Kokomi or Fischl. And I'm happy with that because from my perspective, the threat here to me is actually Fischl, because she's able to consistently do Superconduct damage, and then if I'm not careful, her burst can actually take out a lot of my team members at one go. So I needed her to, I needed my opponent to swap into Fischl so that I can apply Hydro and start to freeze Fischl and take her out. So the Mirror Maiden actually stays in, and I decide to freeze the Mirror Maiden. And by doing that, my opponent actually did a whole chunk of damage against my team, and if I wanted to swap out to another character, it might be pricey, I think. It is not pricey, because I thought they used the skill on me, so I thought I needed to pay extra, but turns out I didn't. So now I'm just considering what I want to go for now. I could do some damage against Kokomi, or I could set up for my next turn as well, which is exactly what I do. I decide to not freeze the Kokomi. I decide to use the Cathedral so I can heal up my Eula, use the Wangshu In to heal up my Mona, and then feed the final 2 dice into my Liban to get some extra reach for the next round. My opponent starts to use the Kokomi burst, but that is fine with me because now it is round 1 for her Kokomi's healing. Next round is round 2, and I start first, which means that I'll be able to freeze the Kokomi, and therefore they don't really get any kind of healing value out of Kokomi. So I was feeling quite safe with that. And here I'm just trying to roll for all the different kind of Cryo dice. I'm just trying to maximize my chances to get Cryo because I want to go into the Elemental Burst. Freeze Kokomi, use the Elemental skill a ton of times to maximize damage, and hopefully knock out at least one character this turn. So I had enough dice to play Adaptive Sanitation and do the Elemental Burst, and therefore I was able to take out Kokomi. And I was actually quite happy with the ability to take out at least one character, because as you've probably seen how this deck works, right? It's a very Superconduct combo heavy deck. I needed to take out at least one character so that I can predict my opponent's move a little bit better. And what is worrying here is that Fischl is actually up to 2 energy. If she goes up by 1 more energy through use of Star Sign or Kelsis Art or whatever, that is going to be super dangerous for me, so I cannot have that happening. And unfortunately I did mess up here because I didn't calculate the fact that if they left Fischl in, if I changed all my stuff to Cryo, if I use the Elemental skill twice, I will be able to take out Fischl. Right, because I have the additional Hydro dice I can turn to Cryo dice as well. So I could take out Fischl, and hopefully the stacks that I have on my sword will be able to take out Mirror Maiden as well. But since I was not able to kill Fischl now, I decided that I need to heal my team instead. Because even if I were to attack Fischl once more, Fischl will go down to 1 HP, my stack will have, what, 4 stacks? But yeah, Fischl was going to die anyway to the Light Force Sword even if I didn't have any more stacks. And therefore I thought the right play here was really to, just heal up my team and hope that my team does not lose to any of my opponent's attacks during this round. So at the end of the turn, Fischl is defeated through the use of Light Power Sword. Very lucky that my opponent didn't draw into another send-off. And I am drawing into a lot of healing. I've got my Hydro healing setup, I've got my Monster Hash Brown setup. And you may realize here that, hey, I haven't even used Kokomi a single time in this game. Is this even a Kokomi showcase? Is this even a Kokomi deck? And I assure you it is. It's just that I have to rely on Eula on making a lot of these different calls. I can't play Kokomi until I have Leave It To Me, which I only just drew recently. So yeah, I'm just being very, very patient here. So I'm just trying to heal my Eula so that it does not die to my opponent's burst. And my opponent goes in for the Lotus, which I don't really mind because I wanted to freeze them anyway. So unfortunately, instead of using Leave It To Me to go into Kokomi, I have to use it to go into Mona so that I can freeze my opponent immediately. Use the Hydro dice, right? Freeze them now, prevent them from using the rest of their 7 dice, and then at the start of the next turn, the Mirror Maiden will have taken Hydro damage from Mona's elemental skill, and then I'll be able to do freeze damage against the Mirror Maiden. But unfortunately, they did find the second send off, which means that I would not be able to use that free strategy that I had. And then now fully recognizing that, hey, my Mona actually has a chance of dealing a huge chunk of damage because she has a burst online. I can do 4 Hydro damage, and then after that I would still be able to double my Eula's attack as well. So Mona was going to take 1 electro damage, and then Mirror Maiden was going to do probably 3 plus 1 more damage, which is a total of 5 damage, which means that Mona would go down to just 1 HP, right? If I did not use the Monster Hash Brown. So the best case scenario here is that I had to use Monster Hash Brown to keep Mona in for at, what is it now, gonna be 2 HP, so that she survives. She deals Elemental Burst against this Mirror Maiden, and then I go into Eula for the kill. Yep, so luckily Mona is down to 2 HP rather than 1. Luckily Eula is down to just 1 HP, right? I use the Elemental Burst, yeah. And then I guess for insurance, you can argue that I should have used that Purpose Temptation, because now I only have... No, I should not have. I should not have used that as a temptation, because if I did, I would not be able to swap into Eula. So now I needed to swap into... oh, no, never mind. Mona's dead anyway, so I had to freeze onto Eula. But anyway, as you can see how powerful Eula is, essentially Eula does get 10 damage into Mirror Maiden, because she has the buff from Mona, doubling her attack. And she also has Grimheart sitting in the back, waiting for that sneak attack. So it's 4 damage from Grimheart, plus 1 damage from Freeze, plus times 2 from Mona, which is for a total of 10 damage. So GG to my opponent, let's go on to the next one. Next, we are up against a really, really interesting deck. It is basically Diluc, Kaeya, Melt, Swirl, with the help of Sucrose. If I'm not wrong, was this the beginner's team? I don't know, but yeah, essentially my opponent played it really, really well and was super threatening. Which goes to show, right? Your beginner's team is not a shit team. This is actually a good team.
This is
But
destiny.
anyway, I go with the same formula again. I look for the Ancient Helm, I go as Mona, and I pray that my opponent can be frozen. I pray that I'll be able to play my Ancient Helm. So unfortunately, I did not draw my Hydro dice, which means that I cannot swap and play the Ancient Helm at the same time. There could be an argument somewhere saying that I should have played Changing Shifts, but I just couldn't find the space for it in this deck right now. Probably consider it next time.
Dodge this!
So Kaeya goes pretty aggressively against my Mona, but I recognize that my opponent has 0 dice now, and if I swap over to Eula and I set up an Ancient Helm and I end my turn now, it means that I can start my turn by freezing Kaeya, which is exactly what I want to do because my opponent's Kaeya already has the burst set up, and I cannot afford for them to use the burst because it's gonna make it a lot easier for Sucrose to scroll, make it a lot easier for Diluc to melt, and I don't want that. So here you can probably tell that I had to play this game, or rather play with this deck pretty conservatively. I cannot be focusing on building up my energy all the time. I cannot be focusing on dealing damage all the time. I need to find the right window to play my Ancient Helm so that I can end first and see if it's my turns correctly.
Beg for mercy.
And then I can heal up my character as well, right? So it's all about chipping your opponents down consistently rather than trying to do as much damage in the shortest possible time possible. This is not that deck. This is a deck that used with longevity.
Take heart. Victory will be ours.
So now I do go into the Kokomi because I think my opponent was going to go into Diluc, deal some pyro damage to me. And therefore I thought, hey, I don't really like that because if they do this, they'll be able to use Sucrose to start strolling what's that called? Pyro all over to the rest of my team. So I decided to go into Kokomi so that I can use her elemental skill to get rid of that pyro damage. But unfortunately, I kind of did my calculations wrongly. I didn't realize that they would be able to, attack at least 2 more times through the use of the Paramedic Transformer to get more dice. So what this means is that it's going to be pretty scary for my Kokomi if I'm not careful with your Kokomi dice, because the 3rd time you use Diluc's elemental skill, it actually gets a +2 damage. So Kokomi was definitely in the kill zone here. So what I did was that I had to heal up my team because the Diluc will only be able to do 5 damage, right? So if Kokomi is up to 6 damage, Kokomi does not die. My opponent actually goes into Sucrose to do some funny shenanigans, probably trying to swap me around, and I was completely fine with that. I'll rather have a swap around into Mona so that I can set up for a Eula freeze in next turn than having Kokomi die there. So that was not the worst swap in the world because my opponent got rid of Kokomi's application because the Kaeya application was passed on to Kokomi, right? So it just disappeared, and Sucrose got rid of Mona's application as well. So I was completely fine with that, and this means that Bake Kurage managed to do Hydro application to my opponent's Sucrose, which means I'm able to go into Eula to start to freeze my opponent's Sucrose.
Ready for reconnaissance.
But the downside of freezing the Sucrose is that they will be able to go into Kaeya now, and Kaeya will be able to deal his elemental burst, which is super annoying for me. So even though Eula is at 10 HP and Eula has her shoes up, this is still going to hurt.
This moment will be frozen in time.
So Eula takes 1 damage, and now I have a choice, right? Do I want to continue dealing damage to this Kaeya? Or do I want to, you know, just swap around and play my 1-step mushroom? So hash brown. So what I decided to do here is actually go into the burst, because if my opponent has a send off, so be it. At least they will be able to they'll have to end their turn after the send off, because they can't attack me again. But that's exactly what they do. They just end their turn so that they can feed into their Liban. But I was fine with that. I just wanted to use my final hash brown to either heal up my Mona or my Kokomi. So I decided to heal up my Kokomi because my opponent has Sucrose on the field. And with that Sucrose, what that means is that they'll be able to swap my characters around, which is pretty annoying. And therefore, if they ever swap into Kokomi, Kokomi might just be a free kill for them. So at the end of the turn, all of my little summons managed to kill off Kaeya, which is good. Because now it means that they're only down to between Diluc and Sucrose. But this is still a big problem for me, because even with Kaeya gone, they have their elemental burst, the Kaeya burst set up, right? So they still have a consistent way of dealing Caro to me at least for 2 more turns, which is super annoying. And if Sucrose does use their Anemo attack, they are going to be able to pass even more Caro damage to me, which is good news for Diluc, because they can just swap into Diluc and do big knock damage to me. So this is actually quite... It looks like I'm in a good position right now because I have more characters, but it's actually a pretty dangerous position to be in. And what is more threatening is that my opponent does go for a bunch of different heals. They've got Mushroom, Pizza, they've got the Lucky Dog Circlet, they are able to heal for a total of 3 already, with threatening to heal 1 more. So there was no way I was able to kill off that Sucrose. So with that in mind, I just decided, hey, I just need to shut down Sucrose. I need to find a way to survive. I need to find a way to, you know, start to bring the HP of my characters back. So I just go into the Kokomi burst so that I have a chance of healing my team for 1, but I also have to consider if that is the right thing to do. Because yes, I can heal the team for 1, but at what cost, right? If I heal the team for 1, I will not be able to play Paimon, I will not be able to play Liban. So what this means is that I am basically trading 2 HP and 3 times 1 HP heals for an additional attack next turn. And since the Sucrose is so tanky with the Lucky Dog Circlet and with the Mushroom Pizza, I think I was valuing the additional attacks over the healing, which is why I just decided to play Liban and play Paimon, so that at least next turn I can play, I'm gonna have some extra dice with Paimon, and then hopefully the turn after I can have, if I have 1 dice left over, I'll be able to swap, and I'll be able to, you know, get Liban fully fed. So my opponent goes into Diluc with their final dice, and that was actually pretty annoying for me, because this means that the Anemo summon is able to take out Kokomi, which is not good news for me because I really wanted to use her to heal. But speaking of healing, I do draw into Favona's Cathedral and Wangshu, which is 2 huge healing stuff for me, but I need to manage my resources and my movement in such a way that both my characters will survive to even receive the heals from Wangshu and Cathedral. And I have a very big feeling, very bad feeling, that Mona just dies here.
Shadows of fate.
Which she probably does. So my opponent goes in to leave it to me, go into Sucrose, and is probably trying to knock out my Mona, which is really good play for them, because now they are able to deal damage against Mona, kill off the Mona, and also chip off one of the shields for my Eula, which is pretty bad for me.
Crush.
So they have 4 dice left, and I managed to put a stop to further attack from the Sucrose because I managed to freeze them. But honestly, I'm hoping that they end their turn here so that I can play a Cathedral, I can end my turn, I can beat Liban and get a ton of dice for next turn so that I can, you know, recover for the next turn. But if they do swap into Diluc, then it's a different story. I might have to go on the offensive here. So my opponent actually just feeds the Sucrose even more disgusting food. Sucrose is very filled now, and unfortunately I will not be able to knock out the Sucrose. So what I decided to do is to play it a little bit safer. I just decided to go into the Kokomi Cathedral. Reason for that is because I'm going to get extra dice from Liban, I'm going to get extra dice from Paimon. At the end of this turn, Sucrose is going to get Hydro Application. Diluc already has Hydro Application. So the next turn, this is basically a do or die turn for me, right? For the next turn, I must kill at least one of their characters, which I should be able to because I'm able to freeze both of them, but I must kill them off somehow. So my opponent is going to try to extend the turn a little bit, I think, by playing this parametric transformer. But I'm not sure if this is the right play because they're going to get one counter by attacking using Sucrose. I'm going to freeze Sucrose here, and then when they swap into Diluc, I'm going to freeze Diluc as well. And therefore they'll be getting a ton of elemental dice during their turn when they're not able to do anything at all. So I'm not sure if this was the right play for them.
Beg for mercy.
But anyway, I tried to bring Sucrose down as low as possible again, hoping to really just kill them off. But unfortunately, it was not enough. Even if I were to get the Great Sword attached to Eula, I would still be leaving Sucrose down to 1 HP. But that said, I still decided that that was probably the right thing to do because firstly, I needed to freeze Sucrose. Secondly, I needed to bring Sucrose down as low as possible because Sucrose has persistent healing, right? Sucrose has the Mushroom Pizza and also the Lucky Dogs. So the quicker I can bring her down to a lower point, the less she can recover and the better the position for me. And here I decided to play Adeptus Temptation.
Freeze to the core.
And then go in to freeze the Diluc. So even if they use a send-off to get rid of my Lightfall Sword, I think I was fine with that because it would mean that, you know, they waste their turn, I can recover more, and I can come back and hit back with quite a bit of damage. But essentially, my opponent is trying to recover and trying to set up for the next turn to the Bush Greystone. But what they do not realize is that my opponent's Diluc is now frozen. I can just end my turn now, and then my Lightfall Sword is actually going to do a ton of damage to my opponent's Diluc. So it was supposed to, I think, do maybe like 3-4 damage or something, but dealt 6 damage instead because my opponent's frozen. So yeah, GG's to my opponent. That was actually really fun. I'm actually glad to see that people are building the beginner decks into a huge menace. So do not sleep on the beginner decks. But in any case, if you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comment section below if there's anything you would do differently as well. And also, yeah, if you haven't already, do like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.